Hello, and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In this one, there is a lack of updates from Syriac. I expect that they are delayed, but changes have taken place. So to keep a balanced outlook, considering that Syriac has not updated and Syriac is the #1 most reliable source, I'll have to take a more balanced look at it and check out the updates from Deep State Map, which is the pro-Ukrainian source, and Divgen.ru, which is a Russian source. Therefore, we see that there will be a balanced view from both perspectives. We will start out with Deep State Maps map, then we'll go to the Divgen map, and then we'll go back to Deep State Maps to compare the two. Starting out with the latest update from the 20th of September with Deep State Map, they claim that the Russians have advanced in the western parts of New York. According to Syriac maps, this part is already under Russian control, as well as the northern parts. However, Deep State Map claims that the Ukrainians have a presence in the northern parts of New York and have full control over Nilipivka. Whether this one or Syriac's is more accurate, we do not have any confirmation. However, it is known that Deep State Map delays information according to their own words to maintain operational secrecy for Ukrainian soldiers as they work closely with the Ukrainian government. So we see that this is the current situation in the New York direction according to Deep State Map. In the direction of Ivanivske, the Deep State Map claims that the Russians have advanced here in between Ivanivske and Klishivka, where this entire section of the front line is claimed to be under Russian control according to Syriac maps, not just the eastern bank of the canal, but also this forest area all the way down south towards Klishivka and Andreevka. This section here remains under Ukrainian control. Deep State Map also claims that in the direction of Helsinki, south of Karelivka, the Russians have advanced. This is west of the city of Donetsk and northeast of Kurakhove. They claim that the Russians have recently captured this part, which the Syriac map has claimed multiple days ago. So this is yet again another delayed update. We also see with the unknown section, the gray zone section, the entirety of Shelane Persia is in the gray zone, which again, according to Syriac maps, is already under Russian control. Finally, in the Toretsk direction, we see this advance here by the Russians, which again has been confirmed by Syriac maps multiple days ago. We see that the gray zone already extends all the way to the apartment complex area in the central parts of Toretsk, which is exactly where the front line, according to Syriac maps, is located. So we see Syriac maps is way ahead of Deep State Map. Deep State Map is simply just delaying their updates to match the Ukrainian operational secrecy. Meanwhile, Divgen.ru has no such worries. According to them, Darino and Nikolaevo Darino have both fallen into Russian hands, and not just that, but the Russians have also passed across the river to launch an offensive in the direction of Svetlikovo, which is located in the highway between Sucha in the southeast and Koronevo in the northwest. So based on this information, the Russians have flanked Lyubimivka, which is an important stronghold of the Ukrainians northwest of this location, to hit the supply line and cut the supplies between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian positions here in the north. This would significantly limit the Ukrainian defensive capabilities in the area. Therefore, we see that with this advance, if it is later to be confirmed, the Russians will have a significant gain with their current counteroffensive operations here in the Kursk region, and it would significantly limit the Ukrainian defensive capabilities, which could endanger their positions in this entire section of the front line here to the northwest of Sucha, as their supplies would be cut off. There are naturally supply roads elsewhere which the Ukrainians can make use of, some off-road, dirt roads, and so on, that they can make use of. However, it would limit the supplies due to the lack of the highway and main supply line. They'll have to go around, and it will be more limited what they can actually send. And the fewer roads that are available, the easier it is for the Russians to then target those roads with their own FPV drones and artillery strikes, as they have less area to cover with their reconnaissance, and therefore it is easier for them to detect them and ambush them. We've already seen geolocated footage of Russian DRGs operating here near Sverdlikovo, as we see with this footage here. It was geolocated and showing the Russian positions in the highway between Svetlikovo and Lyubimovka. So we see generally the situation could be very accurate, and the Russians have reached towards Svetlikovo, and based on this information, the Russian counteroffensive here has continued its momentum, and they are still not stopping despite the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the direction of Veseloe, where the Ukrainians are here attempting to continue their operations to halt the Russian counteroffensive here in the Kursk region by attacking the main supply hub of the Russians. So the Ukrainians are pulling off the exact same strategy as the Russians. The difference is that the Russians are seeing more success with the 250 square kilometers of territory that they have captured compared to the Ukrainians having captured around 15 square kilometers and not a single village. The next change reported by Divgen is here in the direction of Selidovo in the southern flank of Pokrovsk. So we see that the Russians, according to Divgen.ru, have seen an advance here in the southern flank of it following the capture of Ukrainsk, which was geolocated a few days ago. The Russians are now relocating their forces to the southern flank of Selidovo, and this has allowed for a push in the direction of it, securing the fortified positions of the Ukrainians in the southern flank of Selidovo and pushing towards the highway connected between Ukrainsk and Selidovo. It is likely that the Russians will take advantage of the current situation and the capture of Ukrainsk to launch an offensive operation towards the southern flank of Selidovo. The Ukrainians have been able to hold strongly onto Selidovo and even recapture some territory following the reinforcements that arrived, but the effect of these reinforcements are slowly deteriorating. With the Russian success nearby, it has allowed them to then hit the Ukrainian defensive positions hardly, and with this they have been able to recapture some territory and are now yet again pushing the Ukrainians back within the town. The next report, according to Divgen, is here to the south, where according to them the Russians have pushed beyond the town of Hovstre here to the southeast to cut off the main road between the pocket of Ukrainian forces northwest of Krasnoarivka from Kurakhova. With this, all roads connecting between the Ukrainian pocket and Kurakhova has been cut off in the eastern part. This means with the fighting in Hrenik, the Russians could completely cut off the final remaining roads across the Vovcha line and completely cut off any Ukrainian connection between this pocket and Kurakhova and the rest of Ukrainian territory. Therefore, the Russian objective is now clear. They want to cut off the Ukrainian positions in the pocket, and their current operations is to secure the positions here in the southern flank to hold on to that, cutting off the main connection between Kurakhova and the pocket, but also to strengthen their offensive in the direction of Hrenik, where the objective is to gain full control over the town, which would allow the Russians to have control over the high ground with the town of Hrenik and the surrounding fortified positions over the river line, where we see the entire location is located on the low ground. And gaining control over this pocket for the Russians would mean that they would have a secure road directly from the city of Donetsk in the east through Karolivka and all the way to Selidovo. Therefore, we see that the current operation is very good for the Russian armed forces supplies, as they would have the railway connection between Donetsk through Avdiivka, Ocheretine, and all the way to Novohrodivka, and they'll have the highway connection between Donetsk through Karolivka towards Selidovo. And that will allow the Russians to have two strong supply lines going directly towards Pokrovsk to strengthen their offensive operations there. At the same time, if we take a look at the fortified positions, we see that Kurakhova has a lot of fortified positions to the south, west, and east of the town. However, in the northern direction, we see that there is hardly any fortified positions. If the Russians gain control over Hrenik and cut off the main supply roads here by Hostere, they will be able to cut off the connection between the pocket and Kurakhova, but it will also allow them to strengthen their positions in the northern flank of Kurakhova and start a battle from the northern bank of the Vovcha River towards the southern bank of the Vovcha River, where they'll have the heights advantage, and they will also face off the Ukrainians in a position where the Ukrainians do not have their fortified positions. Gaining control over this general area would also allow the Russians to flank the Ukrainian positions near Kurakhova, where they can attack it from the rear, from behind the fortified positions. This raises the question as to how Ukraine will respond to this, because they cannot simply build new fortified positions on such a short notice. This means that the Ukrainians would have two options, either to withdraw from the town to safer destinations to avoid a assault by the Russians in the rear where they are undefended, or to launch a counterattack to attempt to regain positions and strengthen their positions, preventing the Russians from gaining full control over the supply roads to the north of the town, cutting it off from its supplies, and isolating it from the rest of Ukraine. It is more likely that the Ukrainians will rely on withdrawing from the town than counterattacking, as we have seen that the Ukrainians are making use of the majority of their reserves in the Kursk offensive, which has limited their manpower elsewhere, as has been reported by Ukrainian soldiers fighting in this section of the front line. And with the recent reinforcements arriving in Selidovo, not being able to completely turn the situation around, but still allowing the Russians to strengthen their positions and counterattack to regain positions, shows that the Ukrainians are indeed lacking in manpower, as is said by the Ukrainian soldiers. Therefore, the Ukrainians simply do not have enough manpower and weapons to launch a counterattack, and therefore the Ukrainians will be forced to either withdraw or to hold their last stand within the town and try their best to prevent a Russian takeover of the town. The Russians gaining control over the town would significantly weaken the Ukrainian positions in this entire section of the front line, from Kurakhove in the north to Velika Novosilka in the southwest, as the entire section would have limited supplies, with the roads towards Pokrovsk cut off, and if the Russians also cut off the road here to the west, following the capture of some of these towns, there would essentially be almost no supply lines towards Kurakhove, and that would allow the Russians to flank the Ukrainians from the rear. The next development, according to Divgen.ru, is in the southern flank of Bakhmut, where we see that, according to them, the Russians have secured the southern flank of the canal, allowing for full control of the Russians over the right bank of the canal all the way from Orlivka in the south through the entirety of the canal line, all the way to Kryhorivka in the north. So based on all of this, we see that generally throughout the front line, the Russians are continuing their advance, which has allowed them to improve their positions in several sections of the front line, mainly in the Kursk direction, where they are ongoing with their counteroffensive and are holding back Ukraine's response to it. And in the eastern front, they're taking advantage of the relocation of Ukrainian troops and their lack of material and personnel to continue their offensive operations, which are seeing success on a daily basis. Going back to compare the situation with the Ukrainian deep state map, we see in the Kursk direction, the Ukrainians in the deep state map still claim that the entirety of Nikolaevo, Darino, and Darino remains under Ukrainian control, much less Svetlikovo, which is completely safe from the Russian counteroffensive. At the same time, they claim that the unknown area, the gray zone here south of Vasiloya, is much larger than Divgen.ru and Suryak maps. At the same time, in the direction of Bakhmut, we see a large section remains under Ukrainian control, according to Deep State map, which shows that there is a large discrepancy between that of Deep State map and other maps in this direction. Same with New York, the northern parts remains under Ukrainian control, according to Deep State map. In the Pokrovsk and Kurakhove section of the front line, the Russians are shown to not only not have control over Hostre, but much less the additional advance reported by Divgen. At the same time, they claim that the gray zone is including the northern outskirts of Hrynik, but no Russian presence within the town itself. And in the southern flank of Selidovo, as well as the northern and eastern parts, remains in a gray zone or under Ukrainian control, despite Syriac maps and Divgen showing a different story. Therefore, we see Deep State map shows a much more favorable situation for the Ukrainians, yet the Russian and neutral maps shows a much more favorable situation for the Russians. Again, we know that Syriac maps as a neutral source and one that has been reliable throughout the entirety of this war will take his words first and foremost, but since his updates are delayed, we have taken this look at both a pro-Russian and a pro-Ukrainian source to just continue this update and see what the situation is said by either side. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out our Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.